Dave, let me give you just a brief intro and then I'll get out of your guys' way.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, we've had Grace and Winnie and Jason, I think
Some
that's
all-stars.
yeah, some DBT Labs VIP all-stars. And yeah, the course is just starting, so it's in its first week, but we're in the fifth run of the course. And one of the real benefits and fun of the course is we have people who are analytics engineers already. Some people are just really getting started. Maybe their team is working adjacent teams or thinking about this as a career path. So always fun. The course is really built by practitioners, operators. Obviously, Emily built this course based on her experience. We have Jake Hannon, who works at Sigma. Ava is a TA from You Need a Budget, and we bring in a bunch of people who can offer additional perspectives. It's really meant to be practitioner oriented. And we have people from, I think I counted 18 countries this run, so various different time zones. So we're recording it so people can watch that later as well, because it may be middle. So I'll let you guys go from there. But yeah, thanks so much for joining.
Of course, happy to be here. Hello, everyone. I've never done a webinar style thing, so it's just hello the void.
Yeah, we've gone back and forth with having the webinar / like having everyone visible. It is weird talking into the void. Awesome. Thanks everyone who is joining live. Jake said this will be recorded, so hello to those watching in the future. As you all know, I am Emily. This course, and this is our first week of the class. We have Dave here from DBT Labs joining us, which is super exciting. For those who are joining, the chat should be open. There's also like the Q&A section. So if any questions come up throughout, definitely drop them in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll try to keep an eye on those. But just to kick us off, Dave, how about you just give us like a quick little intro on yourself, what you do, what you're doing here today, all the good stuff.
What do I do? Well, it's an impossible question to answer. Yeah, so I'm happy to do that. My name is Dave Connors. I am actually, as of last week, now a developer experience advocate at DBT Labs. I have moved over to Jason Gans's team alongside Winnie. So all the people you listed before were either previously my teammate or are currently my teammate. So my background has been in analytics for, I guess, the better part of 2023, 6-7 years now. I started out in a analyst adjacent role back in Boston, where I am from, and very quickly got interested in the technical side of the house. And so there's a team of analysts who are like doing analytics engineering before it was called analytics engineering. I was on the other side of that, where I was communicating that out to our clients and saying, here are your metrics, here's what you should do with our platform, make those metrics go in the right direction. And very quickly I was like bored with that part of things and interested in the thing that was generating the dashboard that I was reading out every day. And that's where my intro to SQL was. There was really good self-service SQL education at that company. I was really lucky to have a few coworkers who helped me through that kind of initial training. And so I switched over to the more technical side of the team after about a year there, and just got sucked down the rabbit hole of continuing to want to develop that technical side of my skill set. And so after a couple of years of doing that, I decided to look for a role at a startup. The company that I started at, which is Athena Health, which is like 5,000 people. Super large. My role was very little in terms of the grand scheme of things. I wanted something that was a little bit more high leverage. And so I took a job in Chicago at a company called HealthJoy. So I was staying in the health tech space. And I was like the first data hire. So it was definitely a big culture shock in terms of like roles and responsibilities and like what I was tasked with doing. And it was by pure happenstance that when I did that, we were engaged with then Fishtown Analytics as a consultancy, and Tristan himself was our consultant. And he quickly recommended that we take a look at 5chan and Snowflake and DBT, and myself and my manager, who were just naturally skeptical of consultants, were like, who is this guy? What does he know? And 2 weeks later, after we ended our engagement with him, he was like, he was right about all of those things. And we ended up starting with DBT, and I think it's a very common story that many of you have probably heard. I found it to be like the single most useful thing in my day-to-day work. It really unlocked my ability to deliver more things in a much more quick, efficient, and reliable way. And when it got to the point where someone was asking for new fields in our major metrics table and bubbling those up through our visualization tool, and I could do that in half an hour, I was like blown away by the power that I was suddenly given, in contrast to that original role that I was coming from in Boston, where all of these decisions were made by much larger entities than just me being able to quickly deliver the value that people were looking for. Then I joined the DBT community, got hooked on the DBT Slack, and they posted a role a couple years into my tenure at Healthjoy, looking for analytics engineers on the professional services team, which is how I landed at DBT Labs. And then I quickly realized that I was actually really bad at DBT. And there was a lot of learning that needed to happen in the first 3 to 6 months. Here, yeah, that's the basic background. I don't know. I'll pause there. That's kind of rambly.
No, that was great. That's awesome. It's funny to hear
Oh,
your.
Joey, what's up?
Oh, do you know him?
Joey, I think, is a Healthjoy employee, no? Is that the same Joey Berkowitz? Yeah, there he is.
That's awesome. Connections
I
everywhere.
referred him, left, and then gave him a crappy DBT project to fix.
Now he's here learning how to make it better. Speaking of that, you gave a talk at Coalesce about building mature DBT projects. And during our course, we're building a very small DBT project, but we're starting it from scratch. We're learning like all the best practices, how to, do all the model layers and testing and macros. And each week we're just adding on complexity. But if you want to give us maybe a quick abstract of what your DBT Coalesce talk was about on building DBT projects, since it's very good topic for this group.
Absolutely, yeah. I told this to Emily. I was felt like I had to really dust this off because I hadn't looked at this material in a long time. But yeah, so I started at DBT in November of 2020. And so I had about a year under my belt when Coalesce 2021 came around. And so by then I had worked with probably, I don't know, half a dozen to 10 clients in various stages of their DBT journeys. And it became clear to me that people were really interested in using DBT. They've heard a lot about it. They heard the spiel that it makes you quicker, faster, stronger, all of those great adjectives. But people were looking for a hook to get started, right? Because it's like I mentioned before, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. If you start with it, you can choose to go really deep. Some people look at that and get really intimidated by it, but the way that a DBT project looks and feels, it's not just SQL. It's got this weird Jinja stuff in it. I have to worry about these configs. You can get very lost in it very quickly. So the talk that I gave was about where that hook should start and where to think about as you work your way through that journey of building a DBT project, when it makes sense to think about adding new features, going deeper on particular features. So the basic thesis is, I guess the metaphor that I used was like a child growing up, you're giving birth to a DBT project, go through its different life cycle stages. And hilariously, my dad joined the Slack channel for my talk. And then as I was talking about childhood stages, he was dropping photos of me in each of those childhood stages into the DBT Slack. So that was pretty funny. But basically, when you're building a DBT project, I think the single most important thing to do to start is just to get it to run. Don't even worry about getting anything right. So long as you have a SQL query in a model file, and you can do a DBT run and result in a object in your warehouse, that's a huge win. Like that is not nothing. So the fact that you can like have DBT mimic the behavior of whatever tool you're coming from is a great place to start. That's like the infant DBT project. As we think about the power that DBT has to modularize and abstract and allow you to write macros to remove repetitive code, that's where we start to think about adding like model feature completeness. We're going wider on the set of things that DBT can do. That comes in stages 2 and 3, where we're going to add sources, build abstractions between the models and the data that they depend on. We're going to take that query that we started with and rip it out and build it into different modeling layers that have like logical relationships to each other. We're going to start to add tests and documentation, which, you know, for people who haven't written YAML seems scary, but once you get the look and feel of what those look like, they're actually relatively low effort. So those are like the first steps of things you start to layer into the project. As we need to go on through those cycles, we start to go a little bit deeper, right? We think about incremental models. We start to think about different optionalities and configs, and like getting careful with, or not careful, like getting deeper into all of the depths of, I don't know, I can't think of a particular feature, but instead of just doing unique and not null tests, you're writing custom tests, and instead of just declaring sources, you're also describing and testing those as well. And you're starting like documenting columns instead of just model levels. You're starting to take each of those things that we just are starting to layer in and go deeper and deeper. The last few, like the last 2 levels, I think are still honestly a work in progress, in that DBT continues to add new features. Like the last couple, the adulthood phase of the project that I identified was like solidifying your relationships between the other tools in your ecosystem, right? So once you like have a really strong and mature DBT project that's doing its thing, you don't need to do a ton of maintenance outside of like net new development. Having really strong integrations with like your BI tools and with your warehouse, and making sure that permissions are all taken care of. I think that's actually really evolving with sort of the things like the metrics and the semantic layer. So I should probably update this someday, honestly, because it's just like a DBT project itself. It's never ending. And yes, Joey is my adopted son. Sorry, going back to the comments.
Yeah, that like flow of like steps makes a lot of sense to me, especially for people like just starting out with a DBT project like we are in the course. It would be very overwhelming to try and do everything at one time. So I really like the idea of incrementally making it more and more like kind of complex as you go, and just adding on different features as you go. Because starting right away with a super complex macro, you're going to be like, what am I looking at? Like,
Right.
what's going on?
And I think that's important to consider, both for like people who are new to it, but also once you become very comfortable with it, balancing that complexity for new people joining your project is also pretty important. There were a couple projects I worked on with some super data engineering heavy teams where most of the models were like macro calls, and you need to go like sift through layers of macros to figure out what the actual SQL logic was. And so there's always this balance of complexity, readability, and flexibility for the people who are going to join your project eventually.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. Is like, there definitely is a trade-off between making things, I guess, dry and also making it readable and like maintainable and usable for like newer people. I think that is something like maybe that isn't talked about as much as it should be. Like, yeah, there's all these cool things you can do. There's trade-offs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Someone typed in a question in the Q&A. Let's see. What is your recommended journey to start with DBT, just from what you've seen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the Corise course is a phenomenal way to jumpstart your DBT journey. I think having some guardrails around like knowing how to set up and interact with DBT, as well as like a sandbox place to do some basic transformations, is pretty critical. I think Joey can tell you how poor my DBT project was, and it was because I didn't have those guardrails. I like honestly, before I had a better understanding of how to manage Python versions and downloading DBT to the CLI, I was running it on a Windows machine through like an Anaconda server that I don't know how it worked. It's a miracle that DBT ran on my laptop. So the fact that you have people and like kind of sandbox environments to do this kind of help you get that understanding of how the pieces fit together, of DBT on the CLI, how it connects to my warehouse, what kind of queries it's running. I think that's a major benefit. And I would also plug that the DBT fundamentals course on courses.getdbt.com, totally free, and can also, so long as you have a warehouse, you can get the data that we use and have a similar experience of having sandbox environments. And the course is actually very much designed along the lines of how I described features being layered in. Starts with models, think about modularity after that, think about tests and docs after that. And I don't know if anyone has done any of those courses, but Kyle is a phenomenal teacher. People were taking selfies with Kyle throughout the entirety of Coalesce because he's the face of training.
Yeah, Kyle is great. I think that makes a lot of sense. When I first started with DBT, there weren't any courses. So it was mostly learning on the job and like making a lot of mistakes and learning from those mistakes and refactoring our DBT project many times as we learned what to do and what not to do. Sorry, there's a lot of traffic outside the window. I don't know if you can hear that. Cool. So, sorry, lots of cars beeping and I lost my train of thought. Yes, learning on the job is great, but also all of these new courses, I think, are probably a faster way to learn all the mistakes that all of us have made in the past, and we can tell you what we learned from them so you don't have to make them yourself.
The horror stories.
Okay, we got some more questions coming in. Let's see. I guess this is a similar question on the, instead of just DBT, just like journey to start with analytics engineering. What would the like ideal tech stack look like to you?
That is a question that's definitely evolving over time as well. I specifically for tech stack related things, I definitely gravitate towards Snowflake still. It is the one that I used at my first job, even before DBT, when I was like learning SQL. We just made the jump from Oracle to Snowflake. So it was like the thing that I was most comfortable with. I also find it to be the most straightforward. I think there's also like some of the other major platforms have sort of these, I think I was going to say the word warts, but I don't know if that's like the right word. Some uniqueness to them that make them difficult to interact with. Whereas I feel like Snowflake has a bit more of a practitioner mindset. And I think they're looking ahead towards offering new and interesting things quicker than other platforms are, like DBT Python models being something that comes to mind. As far as everything else goes, it's hard to answer that question because it's super, super specific based on the context of the business that you're in. 2 years ago, I would have said Looker was like far and away my favorite BI tool. It's what we had at Healthjoy. I enjoyed writing LookML for a while. I think that's evolving as like things get pushed into sort of DBT metrics, and there are partners that can integrate with DBT a little bit more closely. Not that you need to do that, but I think like having something that's a little bit and Looker is a little bit heavy, right? It's like it has a whole modeling language unto itself. So something that's maybe a little bit more flexible could be better to get started with. I haven't done BI stuff in a really long time. I feel like as I have gone deeper into analytics engineering, I live in the DBT like infra shape of your models world, and someone else can pick it up from there. I feel like I have less strong BI tool feelings than I did a while ago. And on the other side of things, like for the extract and load, I think that's also super specific. If you have a lot of SaaS apps that you're pulling from, Stitcher 5 makes a lot of sense. If you're trying to like instrument Snowplow on all your apps, it's likely that you're going to need to run something custom. I think Snowflake's the only thing I have like strong conviction about, I guess, is the summary there.
Yeah, I definitely have seen many different stacks work well for many different companies and industries. So it definitely depends, but agree, Snowflake has definitely been my favorite. I love that we can use it in the course too. Because me and Jake, we'd be like talking about all this cool Snowflake stuff before, when we were the first 2 runs of the course, we were just using like Postgres. And we're like, but you can do cloning and like all this fun stuff, but we can't show you it.
Yeah.
And now we can.
One other warehouse, I guess it's a warehouse that's in the zeitgeist these days, is DuckDB. I don't know if folks have used that before, but it's really easy to install. It's similar to Postgres, where it's like a locally hosted database. And it's just like one database file, and the profile setup for DBT is like point to that file, and that's it. And you can just run really fast DBT executions against CSV data within that database file. So if you're looking for just like something to play with that's like really responsive in your local environment, that's one to check out. I'm new to it, so I don't have like really strong recommendations, but the folks are talking about it.
Yeah, I also haven't used it myself, but I've heard so many good things about it. Definitely need to check it out at some point. All right, let's see. Questions. Okay. Someone asked a question, which actually I'm going to try to find the docs to help answer this question as we're talking about it. But they're asking around like how to decide what materialization strategy to use along, basically like along the DAG, which there is really good DBT docs on this. So I'm going to try to find them. It's like the best practices that Winnie put together. But if you want to talk, I'm gonna search for it so I can throw it in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the answer to that question is also pretty contextual. Depends on like the type of model and like where it sits, obviously, which is inherent to the question you asked. I think the balance is really between like performance when you build it versus performance when you want to use it. So views are super, super cheap and fast to build. They take a while to run depending on the nature of the data underneath it. And especially when you get to a point where you've got like a chain of views together and you're at query time, passing that compute all the way down the chain, having to recompute in memory every single time you want to run that thing. It depends. So for that example, like the staging models you might build directly on top of source tables almost unanimously can be views, like one layer of view on top of a table, generally really fast to run, generally really fast to query. As you get downstream to things that people are going to be querying like all the time, so things on the end of the DAG that are pointed to your BI tools, likely that you want those to be snappy and responsive when people are wanting to use them. So table materialization makes sense. The general flow that we recommend is start with everything as a view. When it gets too long to query, think about switching it to a table, which is a full drop and refresh. When that gets too long to actually build, like it's taking forever to process and write that data during the course of a DBT run, think about migrating to incremental, which allows you to maintain speed of querying because it's still a table, but you get to have the benefit of batch executions, which are faster to run. So it's almost like that itself is part of the maturation process of a DBT project. But I would say generally speaking, if you're thinking about a DAG, the further left you are, the more likely it is to be a view. The further you are, the more likely it is to be a table in some way.
Yes, I just posted the guide in the chat. I don't know, it only lets me send to host and panelists, so I'm not sure if it's sent to everybody.
Oh man, I've been doing that the whole time. I should resend my
I think
things.
there's an option for everyone. But if everyone can see it, that's great.
Yeah, it's this very weird default that like it's defaults to send there, but I will, while you guys talk, go find which of any good links were sent just to host a panel and share them. And then I'll also make sure there's a show notes kind of thing that I will send out after with all sorts of goodies and things
Yeah, we'll
mentioned.
post this all in Slack too. But yeah, I think that's something that at Drizzly and our DBT project was one of the things that before I left was like one of the things I really wanted to go back and change, was like how we were doing views and tables. And we did utilize a lot of incremental models because we needed to for like performance for clickstream and stuff like that. But all of our staging layer was tables. It was fine. It was fine, but like I wanted to go back and change more things to views. More so, I guess, if you are more on the data engineering, analytics engineering side of the spectrum, like you'll start to think about these things in terms of cost and performance and like Snowflake spend and all of that. And that's very much the world that I've been in for the past couple of years. So yeah, I mean, once you start to get more comfortable with all of these things, you'll start to be able to think about it in terms of like, how's the performance? What can I do to make things like faster and cheaper and all of that? And I think that's honestly like fun to me to think about things that way.
Yeah, it's super fun. That's one of the things you can go very deep on very quickly.
Yes.
Spend way too.
Multiple startups in the space of optimizing your Snowflake costs, including Niall startup, who he's coming to speak from formerly Brooklyn Data, coming to speak week 3.
Right? Oh, I didn't know that he was onto a new venture. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's called Select. It's him and Ian, what's his last name? Whitestone, I think.
I will have to check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super cool. He's going to come chat with us in 2 weeks. But yeah, let's see. Someone asked a question. I think we've talked about this a little bit already, but just asking what's so special about Snowflake versus the others. Yeah. I don't know if there's any other stuff that you wanted to add.
Not really. I think like there are certain things you can do in BigQuery, but not in Redshift. There are certain things you can do in Redshift, but not in BigQuery. But generally speaking, Snowflake seems to have like the whole universe of those things available to people. So like you're less likely to have to do a strange workaround in your workflow because of a limitation of the warehouse. I'd also say that specifically for DBT itself, this is not necessarily true of Redshift, but for whatever reason, the Python connector that Snowflake makes available that allows you to do a DBT run and then have things fire against Snowflake is super fast and responsive. Whereas like doing that on BigQuery, you have to wait for like the cluster to spin up. Databricks has a similar like kind of login interaction time that's a lot longer and noticeable for doing DBT development. So selfishly, it's just like really easy to use. I think that's most of why I would recommend it. You don't notice it as much as you notice the other ones.
Yeah, I agree. I started on Redshift at Drizzly, and we had just a lot of our data, the way that it came in was like JSON. And at the time, I think Redshift might have this now, but back a couple of years ago, they didn't. have a good way to work with JSON. So we had all these super ugly, like regex parsing things that were just like really hard to write/read. And once we migrated to Snowflake, it'd be like this whole long, ugly thing turned into this little tiny one line,
Yeah, exactly.
easy solution.
Yeah, we'll do Dave and still a young startup ourselves at Corise, and we set up our data stack, and we used Emily as free consulting and others as free consulting but Saurabh on our team who set it up he sometimes gives a little talk on like I don't know, call it like startup-y data stack and like all the tools that we netted out on, or vendors we evaluated. And yeah, we're on Snowflake too, and I think we use Metabase as a very lightweight tool for data, but we'll share that too. And it's actually a fun thing for those of you in the class. We'll do a session towards the end of the course. So you're the first data person, or so you're setting this up. And we get some pretty good lessons from that, and I guess shared empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. I see one more question in the Q&A.
About the DBT Developer Certificate. Do you want to give a little overview of that?
Yeah, so I was the second person to get it. I was helping develop it, so I got an early access. I would definitely recommend it. I think it's a really nice. It's new, so I don't have any like particular sort of case studies of someone getting it and being able to kind of leverage that for an additional position down the line. But I imagine that eventually, we've seen tons of job postings that require DBT. I imagine that being able to list DBT developer certification on your resume is a huge indicator to recruiters at any company looking for analytics engineering that you're capable and able to do the job. So I think it's a major benefit, I would say, your marketability in the sort of the data job space. In terms of how deep you need to go, it's not meant to trick anyone, but there's like some advanced concepts on there that would require you to probably be a DBT user for 6-8 months or so. Get really comfortable with the basics of the objects that you need to build, how to interact with them with a DBT command, and a couple of the sort of like more advanced implementation type of things. But I believe the bar for passing is like a 65, so it's not like impossible to achieve. And I think it would be a great thing to have as you're looking to move into this space. I think it's a great stamp of approval.
Awesome. Yeah, just following up on Slack too. There's a number of people. We've had a couple hundred people go through Emily's course, and some people went on and did the certificate as well. So we can kind of drop some names and maybe get some advice as well. So
totally.
Yeah.
Alumni Deanna Minnick from maybe the last round, 2 rounds ago, joined our apprenticeship program and just recently got certified. So she would definitely have some good advice.
Awesome. Yeah, she will be mentioned. Surely. It's great.
Sorry, Deanna.
We love hearing about our alumni. So usually we end these at 45 minutes. So in the last like couple minutes, maybe Dave, you can just like give the class or whoever else has joined just whatever like advice you have on either like getting into data, or if you're already in data, just like continuing to improve and grow and all of that good stuff.
Yeah. A lot of directions I could take that question. I think what's worked for me has been to like stay curious on the technical side. I think you can always continue to deepen your technical understanding of really DBT itself is one thing, but like how all of these pieces fit together is another. I think I've gotten a lot better at the concepts surrounding Python and Python environments, and like being able to do more things quickly with that knowledge combined with the DBT knowledge. My colleagues and I started from scratch about a year ago building a new DBT package. And so that was a really interesting experience to take knowledge of DBT and add in a layer of like cross compatibility and all of these different things that helped maintain and deepen my technical expertise. I think that's always something that helps you as a data practitioner be higher leverage. You can get into more of the conversations and be a useful partner with the people who are trying to solve those problems. But I think the other thing that has been on my mind of late is that no matter how technically capable you get, so many of the challenges of data work are just people problems. I caught up with a former manager of myself and Joey Berkowitz, Alex Vienna, this past week. And he was VP of data at Heltroy. He's now the VP of data over at Vercel, and was just describing that like they're reaching the scale where like they're just running into the same sort of evergreen problems that data people run into, where it's like this person doesn't want this button here. Like they don't want to press the filter button. They need a new report. It's the same negotiation things between stakeholder and data person that I think felt by just about everyone. So my advice, I think, would be to not neglect sort of the soft skills of communication and helping people understand what they're actually asking for. When someone comes to you and says, I need this report yesterday, instead of just saying, okay, which is something I did all the time in all of my previous roles and like delivering that report, trying to unpack, okay, what decision are we going to make off of this new data if you have this? What is the actual underlying problem that you're trying to solve here? Are we just satisfying a desire to have a report received in the inbox? Those are skills that take a lifetime to master, in my opinion, but are really critical to doing data work well. For as clean as your DAG may be and as performant as your queries may be, if people aren't using them to help them achieve whatever they need to do in their jobs, it isn't a full success until you get to that point. It's very vague, but I think it's a thing that's super important.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Stay curious for sure is great advice just for life.
Yeah.
Especially with data, like I'm sure it's like this in a lot of jobs, but just like the ecosystem, as we've talked about throughout this, is like constantly changing. There's always new tools to learn. There's always new best practices. There's always like new ways to learn to do things. Yeah, you got to keep up with it all.
That's right.
Maybe not all of it, but
Not all of it.
not all of it.
What, Dave, just on the package side, yeah, like how would you distill the process of creating a package? Why was that so important? Was it, or yeah, what were the kind of things that you gleaned from going through that process of creating a package?
Yeah. First of all, it was just super fun. It was not like, it was a kind of a what if idea for a project, and we had some downtime over the holidays last year, and we just started to put together. I think, yeah, the lessons learned. I think it's a good way, once you reach like a pretty high level of DBT knowledge, it's a good way to get some exposure to like the internals of DBT, because as you start to build a DBT project that's able to be run across 5 or 6 different warehouse providers, you need to go into the guts of DBT to understand how like DBT core itself like behaves differently on Snowflake versus Redshift versus BigQuery, which I think has been really helpful for me, because it's unlocked my understanding of like how all those things fit together and allowed me to make some actual contributions to DBT core itself. So I feel like in taking a DBT project and expanding it beyond the scope of a single warehouse and a single use case, it helped me gain a bit more technical expertise for sort of DBT, the tool, rather than just DBT for my use case. Like you start to have to build in. That's actually, I think the other thing that's been interesting is just like how the community interacts with it. I think when we started, we didn't think so I should probably send you the link. It's called DBT Project Evaluator. Parses your project, tells you whether or not things are roughly in scope with our best practices in an automated way. And like it's grown like massively. Like people have really taken to it, and there's been a ton of community suggestions. And so I think part of what I've learned a lot is how to do more product management style work, where it's like we have these proposals. This one is in scope, this one's out of scope. We'd like to encourage a community member to contribute here. Like it's been an interesting experiment with working in open source and working out in the open, which I think has been really cool.
Sorry, I just posted it in the chat. I think did Grace work on that too? Because
Yeah.
I think I remember her mentioning that when she came and talked to us.
Yeah, myself and Grace, and third person who would be a great candidate for this exact thing, Benoit, or the maintainers of that package. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely send a link to that as well in the wrap up that we send out after this. But we are at, it's 4:45 here. I think it's 11:45 on the East Coast. But it was awesome chatting with you, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
There was a couple questions left in the QA. I think maybe we can just follow up with those. Sync.
Happy to, yeah.
I screenshotted them, so we'll have them saved. So I'll follow up with you. But yeah, thanks again.
Of course.
If anyone watching now or later wants to like get in touch with you, wants to ask a question, what's the best way to do that?
For sure. DBT Slack, I'm always on it. I'm at Dave. So if you can sift through all the Daves on there, I'm sure you'll find me eventually. I'm always open to chatting with folks. That's probably how I'll respond to these questions, honestly. Otherwise, GitHub issues. If you're looking to contribute to DBT Docs or our developer blog, an issue on our doc site is always encouraged. Yeah, I'm around. I'm online. Feel free to reach out in any way you prefer.
Thanks, Dave. We're very grateful.
Yeah, no problem at all. Good luck, and good luck with the rest of the course.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.